Hi there, this is Nono, and this video is a quick overview of the HTTP protocol. We're going to see what HTTP is, how to create an HTTP server, and how to create an HTTP client to make HTTP requests. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and is the foundation of data communication for the web. You use HTTP daily to access internet resources on the web. With requests, you can access content on servers that might be running online or locally on your machines. There are two types of requests that are called GET or POST requests, and we'll see the differences next. Your browser makes a GET request when it wants to load a web address, for instance, and it makes a POST request when it wants to send a form with text or data, like an image you want to upload to the web, or when you want to log in. GET requests pass parameters on the URL itself, which is not too safe because networks can monitorize the parameters you're passing on the URL. On the contrary, POST requests pass them on the body of the request, which is safer and is usually used to upload data or to log in a user to basically to authenticate a user to a website. What we're gonna see next is how to build an HTTP server with Node.js using the Express package, and then how to build an HTTP client also with Node.js using the super agent client. And we'll see also how to make some requests using curl commands on the command line. As we said, the first thing we're going to do is create an HTTP server. For this, the first thing we need to do is create a Node.js project folder and then install the Express package. With the terminal, you can do this by hand, basically creating manually a folder, but with the terminal, I'm going to go to my desktop. I'm going to create a folder called HTTP server for our project. I'm going to navigate to that folder, and then I'm going to run the command npm init. Notice how I'm inside the HTTP folder right now. So I'm going to run npm init. And npm, which is the Node.js package manager, is going to ask me for a name for my project. You can click enter for selecting all the defaults. It would ask you for the entry point of the app, which is basically, in this case, we're going to use index.js, but you could have any entry point on the app. So once we've initialized the project, we get a package.json file that we can see if we open a Visual Studio Code or your text editor of choice in this window, and this basically defines the basics of your project, right? As I said, we need to install the Express package. So I'm going ahead, I'm going to do npm install express. And as you can see, the Node package manager installs the Express package, the latest stable available version, and puts that on my dependencies of the project. As we set to this app, our entry point is index.js. We can create that file manually here by typing index.js. If we write a simple JavaScript command, and we can go to the terminal now and run node index.js, and it basically executes this program we're defining with this file. As we said, we're going to do an HTTP server, and for that, the first thing we need to do is to create an Express application, right? We already installed Express as a dependency on the project, so we can directly require it in JavaScript. What this means when we do this require, as we've seen in Node.js, basically when we install packages, they all go here, right? There are a lot of dependencies of the packages we've installed, and basically one of these packages is Express. So the code is already embedded here in this folder, and we can use it on our application just by calling require and having it in the Express variable. So what we're going to do is that we're going to create an app that is basically the Express app, and we're going to do the simplest thing we can do to get started with. So we're going to say app use so app-get, sorry, to make a GET request on the root of our server. And then we're going to make a function that gets a request and the response variables. And then we're going to basically send some text as a response. This by itself is defining an HTTP GET route. And we're going to see a bit more in detail what this is. And the only thing we need to do is to tell the server to listen in a specific port. Basically, we're going to listen on the port 3000, and we're going to log to the console that our server is running on localhost 3000. So now with this Node application that we've created, we can go back to our terminal and run node index.js. Now we see that the server is running in localhost 3000, and we can basically open this URL here, and we get the response that we've coded for. A useful thing to do is to basically inside your GET request log what's happened, and some system would do this automatically. So I'm just going to log the text GET when this request is called. You're going to notice that if I reload this page, nothing really happens different, because I have to stop the server with Control-C and then run it again. So now every time that we run this page, we get notified here, and you can see if I do multiple refreshes, I'm continuously getting GET requests there. Okay, so let's continue and do some more complicated things with what we can get to do with GET and POST requests on Node.js. So the first thing we're going to do is define our port here. This, even though it's not important right now, is useful if you want to deploy your app somewhere, for example, like Heroku online, because this basically would say that if the environment is defined in the port variable, it will get the port of the application from the environment that in Heroku.com would be Heroku. They will provide a port for you. And if there is no environment set up, you will basically use 3000, fall back to the value 3000. And this is what we can use here. And you can see that actually here, this is of no difference. We still get the same behavior. Okay, so we did a GET request that is fairly simple. We basically make a request and send some string of text. And you can see that this is plain HTML that gets displayed in your browser. So if we change this to have some HTML, we see that this is bold here. Okay, let's do some other type of requests. So one thing that is useful is to get variables posted to GET or POST route, right? Right now we're accessing all the routes in the browser because they're GET routes, but we can also get them in a different way, access them in a different way. Let's try to add a parameter into our GET request. For this, we're gonna need to go back to our console and install the package body parser. So once we have the body parser package installed, it would appear in our list of dependencies, and then we can start using it on our application. So we're gonna define the variable body parser here, and now we're going to configure express body parser as middleware. So we say that our app is going to use body parser full encoded extended false, and that it should also use Json. Now what this enables us to do is that we can use we can access parameters on our URL. So for example, if we put here basically a new route, let's call it for now color. And we're going to basically have also the request and response as our parameters, and we're going to respond send. This is route color. Pretty simple. So if we restart our server, now we can not only go here, but we can also go to this other route, the route color, and it says this is route color. We're not logging anything here yet. And basically what I wanted to do here is that the first thing is that we, instead of using send, we can use JSON and make a JSON response. So for example, we could say that color equals no color yet. So if we restart our server, we can see that this now has a different font, it's monotype, because the response body is actually telling that the content that we're responding is JSON. And this can be useful if you want to send information throughout different applications. What we're going to do now is that we're going to add a parameter. Notice the colon here. And this basically means that whatever is written here on the URL is going to be used as a variable. This means that I can not only use color, but I can use color with something else here, right? And let's say that we want to capture that the color is red. So we would basically capture the variable color from the parameters of the request, like that. And then we can use that variable color in our response. Start the server again here. And now I could basically change the color and get the constructed JSON here. So far we've seen how to make a simple GET request and a bit more complex GET request that gets one parameter. What we're gonna see next is how to do POST requests. POST requests are constructed on the same way. So we can say, for example, that our post is gonna be called year. So we wanna get the current year, for example, from an application. So we pass also the request and the response, and we can do exactly the same. So we can respond with JSON and say the year is 2018. What happens is that even if we restart our server, we are going to call the route year here, and it's going to say that it cannot get year. We could access this by putting a GET request here, and this would work. But we want to have a POST request because, as we mentioned before, this might be more useful to upload data or to send parameters to authenticate the user or to do things that are more security sensitive. So we set a route to be POST, but we cannot access it through the browser. So the first thing we're going to do is that we're going to try to access it with something called curl commands. And curl commands are a way to construct HTTP requests, maybe GET or POST requests, directly from the terminal. So you can say curl method post, and the URL is localhost 3000 year, and we're gonna press enter. So notice how I'm getting this information here. To visualize it better, you can add something in the end, and we can see that we're actually getting to the response that we wanted through making a POST request in a curl command. We're gonna learn later how to make this POST request directly from a JavaScript application instead of from the terminal. And the next thing I want you to see is that we could have also another POST request, for instance, to log in a user. We're not gonna do the logic of logging up a user, but we're gonna pass a parameter that's gonna be their username, right? Just so you see how you would actually handle passing a variable on a POST request. So we would say that the username would be equal to the request body username. And then we will return the username being that variable username. again, now we can go, if we have this post request here, we can restart our server. And within our curl command, we're going to do a post request to localhost 3000 login. And we're going to send data that is going to be username equals nonoesp. And what we're getting is that the username equals nonoesp. And this is the response constructed here. But there is no way that we could access this through the browser because it doesn't let us, even if I add the parameters here or anything like that. So this is a basic way to generate get an HTTP server with get and post requests. Get requests are really useful if you want to be able to access information or things from a database or things from your website directly on the browser, or even like process some data and show it on the browser. But it's not useful if you want to do things like uploading images or if you want to authenticate a user. Let's see a really simple way of actually using information on the URL on a GET request to display it on the browser. For example, we can make our API to add two numbers. So we could say like A and B are our two parameters. And then we're going to basically just send the addition of those two numbers. So we can say that A is going to be parameter A and B is going to be parameter B. So we can say that result equals A plus B. And now we can just send the result. So we can say the result is result. We restart our server and now we run add 10 plus 5. And we're getting something wrong because basically these two numbers that we're passing are being concatenated as a string. So we actually have to parse this as integer values. So we need to do, basically we have A and B, but we need to actually parse their integer values. And now, hopefully, we get 15. So for example, if we sum 3 plus 4, we get 7. Okay, so I have this HTTP server running, and the only thing that I've changed on it is that I've converted the GET request that we had before, where you could add A and B with a GET request on the browser. I've converted it also to a POST request, where you basically, the resource or the API is called add, and then you get the parameters A and B from the requests body. And again, the same thing that we did before, we return Json now with the resulting number that we've added of those two numbers, right? So as we said, what we're gonna do now is create an HTTP client. We're gonna do go to the desktop. Basically, we're gonna create a new folder that's gonna be called HTTP client, and we're gonna navigate to that folder, and we're going to basically initiate our npm project, our node project. So we do npm init, and we can accept all the defaults. And the next thing we're gonna do is that we're gonna install super agent, which is basically a package, a node package that allows you to easily construct get and post requests. That is what we want to do now. We're going to now create the index.js file, which is going to be the entry point for our application. And I just want you to see how I'm running the HTTP server locally on my machine with basically the code that we have developed before. In this HTTP client, we have the same thing that we did before, that if we log something here, basically we can do node index.js and we'll get that JavaScript script executed. What we're gonna do now is that we're gonna require the super agent package, and we're gonna construct a request. We're gonna start constructing a simple get request, and here we need to specify the full URL and basically to the root of the HTTP server. And then we specify that when this ends, we want to execute this anonymous JavaScript function where we're getting the error if there is an error and the response. If we log the whole response, we'll get this already, but we're gonna see a lot of information. If we're doing a GET request, usually what we care from the request is the text that you can see here. So we could just log the text of the request. You see, and this is what we would see on the browser if we go to the root. Hello, this works. We just see the HTML version of that. And if we now go and want to make a post request, as we said before, we see that we have this resource here, where if we send an add request to the HTTP server and we send on the body the parameters A and B, this post route will basically add those two numbers for us and return it on a JSON string. So what we want to do is call super agent post, and again we get the base URL, but now we're going to call the API add, and we're gonna pass on the body the two parameters A and B, and when we end, again we're gonna do an anonymous function that is going to log the result. And if we get the result of the request as before, we're gonna get a lot of information. But as we can see, the JSON that we care about is on the body. Here there is a difference between the body and the text. The text is a stringified version of the JSON that the request is responding, and this is what we would get in the browser if this was a GET request, for example. So like we did before. Well, but this is not actually the code that we're running here, but let's actually just try that out. So if we put this here and restart the server, this is what we should be seeing here. So this is the text. It's a stringified version of the JSON that we're getting. But if we get the body, straight away we're actually getting a JavaScript object. I mean, that's the whole purpose of JSON, the JSON format. We're getting a JavaScript object and we can use its variables directly. So in our application, we can see that we're basically getting the response body, and this is our response. Let's say that, and if we want to get the let's actually log first the body, so you see what we're getting. We're getting this on this request, and we're gonna stop this from showing. So we're getting result 7, but this is a JavaScript object and we can access its result value directly. So we could do result equal response body result. And now here we could log directly the result of adding 3 and 4 is result. And that is what we should be getting here. Right? So we could basically, here we have our two numbers and we pass them in the function. And that's what we're seeing right now. So this was an overview of the HTTP protocol and how through Node.js you could create an HTTP server and an HTTP client. The HTTP server, just to reiterate, allows you to make an API or some resources or a website or files or a service available online. So you can expose that locally on your computer or on the internet. We're not gonna see here how to put it online on the internet, but this would be basically getting a service like Heroku or your own hosting and making those routes accessible. Then we've seen how to create an HTTP client in Node again. We're using the super agent library to make GET and POST requests. You can use super agent also in the browser with JavaScript, but you can also make POST and GET requests from any programming language. You can make POST or GET requests from Dynamo, Grasshopper, or you can make them from Python, from C#, from JavaScript on the browser, as we said, or even from the command line. Just to kind of close the cycle of everything that we've seen, we have the server open here, and this is my other terminal window. So ignoring the HTTP client that we've built right now, I'm going to construct a POST request to our resource from the terminal. And we are gonna add that data is A equals 1, and let's see if this works, B equals 2. So we get here that 1 plus 2 is 3. This means that even though we've exposed the localhost service as an HTTP service on our computer, and we've accessed it through a call command or a POST request on Node with super agent, with this method, without doing anything, we would be able to access HTTP servers, or basically services or microservices that are already exposed on the cloud for us. This means that we could have done directly from the very beginning something like this. And we're actually getting 301 response from Google because they have a redirection. But if we do some curl command to something that is online and we know that we can actually access, like GitHub's API, we can access information, for example, from a user on GitHub. And we're actually getting a lot of information clean as a JSON object, right? This is kind of all the information that we would be able to grab from our client and then do something with it. For an example of that, we can open the code of our client, and we could make a GET request to GitHub. So what we're gonna do is that we're going to request information for a user and see what comes back here. We're getting a JSON object with the information of my GitHub user, and we see all the things that we have here. So we could log the name and maybe the website or the location of a user from our HTTP client written in Node. And we could do here response, body, name, and then response, body, location. So now when we call this, we get the name and the location, and if we change this to another user, we're also getting their information. And this is just to display that you don't really need to build an HTTP server yourself. You can use APIs that are already online. But what we've learned is that you can also create HTTP servers, because we're going to see ways that you could expose different services or different functionality through the HTTP protocol, and then use it on your own applications as a client. Thanks a lot for watching.